Hey everybody, I am Dave McBride. I want to jump on today and just do a little quick live about why it's so important to make a plan when you plan to do a PC rebuild. So, you may not realize this, but I recently did a new build and I've been kind of posting a little bit on Instagram and elsewhere that I was going to do this. And I had some issues. So let me back up. So I had a 4K build last year or so. And earlier this year, the power company was working on the lines down the street. And as a result of them trying to clean up the power on the lines because they were running too strong, they cut the power in the whole neighborhood on and off 3 or 4 times within a couple hour block. And we'd set up the PC and just rebuilt my wife to use in another room so we could go live simultaneously on 2 separate channels and not have overlap. So because of that, I had moved the PC from where it normally was next to me on a UPS because my internet service provider is on that same UPS. So I have a UPS for your internet. You should have that. And I put in another room, another office for us. And when I did that, I put it on a really nice surge protector, but I hadn't gotten a new UPS yet. And it had been a few weeks or a month or two, and we're like, we really need to get a UPS. So I ordered a UPS. A day or so before the UPS arrived, unbeknownst to us, the power company then was doing work down the street to fix the power lines that they said were carrying too much power through them for our neighborhood. Part of them upgrading the lines is they have to turn the power off for our section of the neighborhood while they replace those lines with lines or sets of lines that can better balance the load for the neighborhood. So I live in an older neighborhood in Jacksonville, and they're slowly upgrading everything. Well, they cut the power on and off several times, and we thought, oh, okay. The UPS kicked in, the surge protector looked like it worked. The PC looked like initially it was fine. The last time they popped it back on, we noticed a big sort of surge through the house. I was like, okay, is everything all right? The PC came back up. I thought it's okay. Later that day, once the power was on and stable, we were working on it and it started being weird, like just freezing during the live stream. We weren't sure what it was. Progressively over the next several days, it got worse. So I started to check the machine and thinking like maybe somehow my Windows got corrupted. And then determined my Windows wasn't really corrupted. It seemed to be running okay. We would get some blue screens of death, which basically means your machine crashes in a major way, gives you a blue screen from Microsoft, and then everything you're working on is lost. Everything you have open at that point is just gone because it doesn't know what happened. And when it restarts, it lost everything. And we'd have trouble getting it restarted at times. It seemed like it was having issues with the motherboard or something in the combination. So I did more testing on the machine and determined that my graphics card seemed to be okay because that was one of the things we thought was damaged, that it was the graphics was going out and it was the graphics card was bad. So I ran a bunch of tests. The graphics card, when we were having it running stably, ran fine. I even reinstalled all of Windows and did a fresh clean install, and it seemed like it made it better. So graphics card was okay. Then stuff was still freezing and giving us issues. So I did a scan on the memory. I scanned all my memory, did a deep memory scan, ran a bunch of tests on it. My memory all came back clean, not showing any issues with the memory in the machine. So I did a hard drive scan to see if there was something wrong with my hard drive because it was caching to that occasionally. Hard drive came back okay. I probably had some old bad sectors because it's an older drive. But when I did the clean install, it seemed like it fixed it. My hard drive then came back fine. So I should say, I did some more tests and poking around, and I determined, based upon like ports on the motherboard stop working randomly or wouldn't give us the full speed they used to give us, or the audio wouldn't come through the audio jack, but you could send the audio instead through something like the HDMI cable and it would work fine. So I kind of determined like, okay, so I've done some damage to either the processor or the motherboard, or the motherboard and the processor combination. And there may or may not be an issue with my power supply because it's really what would have taken the first portion of the hit. That some part of that may not be super stable. So I decided, it's an older machine. I've had it for at least 5 years and I'm due for an upgrade. And it wasn't like it was a planned upgrade where I'm usually planned out ahead of time. I figure out exactly what I want to build and get something a nice jump up. But it was because it was still running well and it was kind of like a backup machine for us. And it wasn't a critical primary machine because we replaced it with a new critical primary machine for most production. And everything we were doing out before the crash, it worked perfectly for what we needed to do. We were doing some design work on it. We were doing email and web work on it. We could go live on the live stream like this, and it worked great. Once the power hit, it was never the same, and it continued to run and let us work on it, but it was never fully capable of doing everything we did before. So it became time to make a planned upgrade, right? I planned on saying, okay, I don't have a budget to replace everything in the machine, and a bunch of my parts are fine and still work. And I can plan on upgrading them in the future, but I will do the critical pieces I really need right now to rebuild the machine and get it better and faster. So I just looked at replacing the motherboard initially. I'm like, I'll replace my motherboard. I'll keep my processor an Intel 10th generation, so it wasn't too bad. 3 generations, I guess, behind, but it was still good. It was still pretty quick. My hard drives were all intact. My memory was intact. My video card was intact. I'm like, I'll replace the motherboard and I'll look at replacing the power supply because it should be okay, but I can't guarantee it. I don't really have a way to test all the like the circuits and everything on the power supply to make sure everything is 100% great and that there's no issue in the power supply. I don't want to replace like the motherboard or the motherboard and the processor and then not replace the power supply and be giving it bad power to the new one and then have problems again and then have to pull everything apart just to replace the power supply. So I went on this path saying, okay, if I just if I replace my power supply with the same one I had before, because I'm keeping everything else the same, and I just get myself a new motherboard and I keep my processor because it should be fine. I'll keep the cooler, which was good, and all the rest of my pieces. The board to replace it with the exact same model I had, which would be the easiest way because then Windows won't have an issue with their major piece change to your system that it may want you to re-register everything with it. I'm like, I could do that. And it was $200 to $300 just for the motherboard alone. And when I started looking around, I'm like, wow, for that price, I could buy a brand new motherboard that's a newer generation and has like more ports on it which one of the things I was really favoring. I wanted more ports on my motherboard than I had because like I said, it was an older board. Didn't have like a USB-C ports that I needed for some things. And I really was looking like, okay, if I'm going to make this change, I can upgrade to a new motherboard. They'll have more ports and more capacity and basically be everything the same. And then, well, if I'm doing that, I'll change my processor and move up to a newer generation processor. So I did that. I got a new motherboard and I got an Intel 12th gen processor to kind of stay in the whole Intel suite thing, to try to keep my Windows as similar as I could. Stay with DDR4 because otherwise it would be a major jump to do DDR5, and then I'd be basically sacrificing working memory that I didn't need to change just to jump to the next generation. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you need to plan that out. So if it was just going to be, I'm going to do a full new build, and whatever I have will be a backup machine and one set aside, or I'll give it to a family member or somebody else in the community that we know that needs a machine that's stable and good, I would have just made the jump bigger. But I decided I'm going to stay with what I have. The price on the memory is great, so I don't even need to upgrade that. I already have it. I have my working graphics card. It will stay in there. I'll need a new cooler for my CPU. I'll do a new CPU and a new motherboard, because if I do a new motherboard, I can spend the same amount or less than I would have spent to replace that old motherboard with one that gives me more features than I was desiring. And I ran into issues. And that's part of why I'm saying you need to plan this out. So first motherboard I got was from Asus, and I got what did I get? A Z67690. And I liked it, and it was DDR4 and it had Wi-Fi, so I was happy with both those things. Had all the ports I needed. Was going to have more NVMe ports than I've ever had, so that was cool. I could put in a new hard drive if I wanted to increase the speed and capacity of my machine, and that would be a small, price-efficient upgrade for my process, and basically give myself extra storage for not much more money and have a newer, faster memory storage solution on my motherboard. So it's good. Put it all in, was doing a video for it, took the cooler off, did some adjustments so I could video it again, did again, had issues with the motherboard. Pins bent badly on the processor and seemed like it was not right from the get-go. Like, I never could get the board to boot successfully, even the very first time I put everything in perfectly and fired it all up. Had to RMA the board. Was told when I RMA'd the board by Asus that was a user defect and non-manufacturer's defect, so it would not be covered under any kind of warranty. I should have to pay them to ship it to them, which I had to do. I should pay to ship it back. I should have to pay to have the processor pins fixed by them if they could. I'd have to pay an extra fee for that. And I would go from a 12-year warranty to a 90-day warranty. And they weren't going to get back to me for like a week or two. And then when I checked my email, because we were looking at the status of it, they said, "Oh, you already missed the thing. We're shipping it back to you unrepaired. You can try it again, or you can ship it back to us and pay a second time, another $25 more for shipping, more to have it repaired again, more for processing fees, more for return shipping fees, and that will then give you your 3-month warranty, 90-day warranty. You don't get full 3 months, you get 9 days." So when it got delayed and messed up, we decided to order a new board because we still need to rebuild the machine. I put the old board back in because, like I said, at least it was stable enough to run, and I couldn't get the new board to even boot for me. I even ordered extra new memory, still wouldn't boot. So I got a new board from them, another Asus, same model. And then my wife said, when you're doing it, why don't you get an alternate just to see if there's an issue that you'd have a backup to build with? So we did that. I made a secondary plan and ordered a second board. This time I got an MIS board. I got the same sort of model. So it's the same Z690 DDR4 with the Wi-Fi. When I went to build the machine again, a second rebuild, I realized the boards were pretty close in specs. There's a slight difference in one of the extra NVMe ports on the MIS board that is slightly slower than the one of the multiple ports on the Asus board, but it also has a BIOS flash ability on the back, and the Asus didn't, and the Asus would have needed a BIOS flash right away to make it really compatible and work right. The other thing I noticed was the layout of the board is slightly different in the fact that MIS gave me more room between the CPU cooler and the memory, which meant I could put the fan on in the front of the cooler so it'd blow it through the back, and I really was happy with that. So I put in, got all up and running, everything worked. Sent the stuff back, had to do an extra complaint about getting a defective board from Asus to get a refund, and were giving me a hard time. Meanwhile, the whole Asus issue with the AMD side is going on, so that kind of actually I think helped in my favor. So I'm not really feeling great about them right now. And I was able to build my machine and get it running. Now, the fun thing is usually when you do these new builds, the drivers for everything basically are there. Like I haven't had a lot of old school world where when I used to do tech back in the day, we'd have to make sure we downloaded all the drivers before you built to make sure you had the drivers for all the accessories, basically your network driver, your audio driver, your graphics driver, your chipset drivers, every driver you'd had. It'd be one of the first things you would do would be like start to load Windows, install all the drivers, finish your Windows load, or load Windows to the point where it would let you in, install all the drivers, and then finish the process. Surprise to me, that's what happened again. So that's why I'm saying it's so critical that you are planning out your build before you get to it. So not just do your research in which boards you like. Will the boards and everything fit okay and fit in your machine? Is it really tight? Is the power supply going to have the right cables you need to plug in all the ports? And do you have everything for that? As that was a challenge the first time, getting the right cable combination to plug into the CPU plugs for the power supply. But the second time around, it wasn't. It was a different pin layout on the motherboard, so I had no problems. Have a new CPU, have a new motherboard in, a new power supply in. Everything else works. Put the new hard drive in, or a storage solution, I should say. The new NVMe works beautifully. Boots into Windows, start going through my install of Windows, get to the point where it wants to connect to the network and says, I can't make any network connections. I can't find any drivers that are give any network adapters on your machine. I was like, what do you mean? Come on, just rediscover it. It's there. And I can see the port flashing in the back. So it's telling me like the network port is showing up. Well, I guess the Windows driver wasn't working successfully for my network driver. So I had to go out and use a laptop, go to MIS, find the newest network driver for my network adapter and the Windows, the drivers for my Wi-Fi adapter. So I grabbed both of them just because if I was going to grab one, I was going to grab both. So if one didn't work, the other one would. And then I went ahead and installed those after I got Windows running, and it successfully saw my drivers. And once I got that in, everything worked. So all of this is just part of this is why you need to make a plan. If I didn't have it in the machine to use to get online, to get the network drivers so I can finish my Windows install, to get my Windows online so I could get the drivers I needed, I would have been stuck. So plan ahead before you do your build, right? If you have your working machine, do your due diligence, roll a little bit old school, download all the drivers onto a thumb drive. download the BIOS flash that you may need onto a thumb drive or their BIOS tool if you have that, and get that all in place, and then kind of make sure everything's going to fit in your case. You have all the cables and connection styles you need for your motherboard, for the front panels, for the power supply, for your graphics card, that all the fans connect, that you know where you're connecting all your fans to, so you have the right, if you need an adapter or some sort of different connection for the lights of the fan to show up, that you know how to get it all to work, and kind of test it out and make sure it's going to fit okay. It was a little bit of a tight fit initially, so I ended up doing some pre-built pieces on it. So when I put it in, I only had to mount the motherboard screws that I normally wouldn't be able to easily get to, because of the case was older and didn't really favor a board that was truly like, the board design was a little bit different, and like how much room I had at the top from what I used to have. It was a little taller, let's say, closer to the top edge than it used to be for the older boards that you used to put in these cases. So just do your pre-planning, figure out, am I making a whole generational jump? Like from DDR4 to DDR5, so it's not going to match? Is the motherboard or the processor jumping generationally that it won't match if I upgrade it? Like on the AMD side, I have the AMD 4s on my other machine, so if I want to upgrade to a newer processor, I could do that on that same board. I may just need a BIOS flash on it, and I would pre-flash the board before I put in the new processor, and then put in the new processor. And if you're changing that processor, do you need to change your cooler, either a liquid cooler or an air cooler? So I went with an air cooler that was newer and a little bit bigger to cover my processor that was a little bigger and heavier. And it all worked great. But if you don't pre-plan ahead of time and kind of test out and make sure everything's going to work, you may end up finding yourself stuck at some point, like when the motherboard doesn't boot and it's defective. And they do show up DOA or dead on arrival or defective or bad pins or something may be wrong on it, that you have a plan of like, okay, if this goes wrong, we can turn around and ship it back. We're not going to wait on anything. We're going to get a new one, or we're going to replace it with a different brand or a different model. And plan out the things like, if I'm going to upgrade this, which model is the right fit for me, so I have all the ports on the back that match up. So just do your due diligence. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out my other videos. Like I said, I had a whole big build video from last year. I'll have a new build video coming up soon for this one. But I just want to remind you, check out the links. And if you need help, I've linked down below, or leave me a comment or DM me. I'll be happy to chat with you about it. So that's my make a plan for your build. Rebuilds are a real thing, and you don't have to replace everything. You can make a significant jump by just basically upgrading your processor or your motherboard and your processor, and even like a graphics card. Those three things can leap you forward hugely. And if you haven't done so, consider upgrading your storage to one of the Gen 4 NVMe's. I know Gen 5 are just coming out, but the Gen 4 are an amazing price point for performance right now, and you can get a fairly decent sized drive for not too much money. So I went with the full terabyte, but I'm thinking I might add a second dual 2 terabyte drive to my machine now to replace one of my older SSDs that probably could be suited to be replaced because it's a bunch of years old and used a lot. So a newer, faster version right on the motherboard would be nice. Just be aware, Len, if you had multiple ports on there, does it need a cooler, or are all the ports the same speed? Because like my board has 4 ports on it. One of them is a 3rd gen speed drive, and the other 3 are all 4th gen drives. So you can drop a 4th gen in a 3rd gen drive. It just won't be as fast as it could be. Or you can drop a 4th gen drive in a 4th gen slot, and it'll give you the full speed. So just kind of plan out, make a plan and make sure you're making those wise choices for you for what you feel like is important or what you feel is not a big game breaker. Like I went from 4 Gen 4s on the Asus board to 3 Gen 4s and 1 Gen 3. And for me, it's super cool to have all those. I don't know if I'll populate all of them in this build before I end up replacing it with something newer. But if I do, I'm okay with one of them being slightly slower. If it's a big drive for just backup storage, that's okay. And I still have 2 SSDs in there, and I can do more because this board actually gave me more SSD ports than the Asus did. So if you're favoring that, pay attention to those little things like one may have more SSD ports on available than the other style from another brand, or is it all basically the same? Or do you really care about having like that BIOS flash ability right on the motherboard? That's really nice, especially when you're doing a new build and you're putting in a newer processor that may be newer than when the board originally was released. So once I flashed the processor, it would support a Intel Gen 13 processor, which is really cool. So I have the ability to grow and go further with this board, and I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see as I start doing all the testing on it to really see how much performance increase I got. I definitely noticed an increase when I just went to do things like install Windows and install apps. That's part of your plan is make sure you make a good list of all the apps you're going to need to reinstall and which ones are the biggest priority for you when you're doing that reinstall and which ones maybe it's time to think about like I'm going to clear that off. I don't really use that and I'm going to save that space and I'm not going to put that back in until sometime down the road when it's critical or I need it, or maybe I don't ever use it anymore and I don't really need it back. So I'll just replace it with something better, newer, or just different because I don't use that app anymore and I don't need to waste that space putting on something I don't use anymore. It's better used by extra cash or extra something. So keep that all in mind. I hope you enjoy this live I was doing. I know nobody really jumped on, but just want to get out there and share with you the importance of the rebuild and why you need to make a plan because you can get burned in unexpected ways really easily. Like just simply like not being able to get back on the network. That one kind of sucks if you're building. So make sure you got your drivers, everything, put everything in place before you build. Then when you go to build, you'll be good to go. If you run into any hiccups, you'll have everything you need. Hope this video helps. Again, leave me a comment down below. I'm Dave Tech Experts. I look forward to working with you.